It's Riff Arcade! I'm Josh.
I'm Butts.
And today is a very special episode because today we'll be making our first podcasty episode. And what that means is that this content is able to be enjoyed purely as audio. So we will be releasing a video and an audio version of this episode. And we've chosen to play Pilot Wing 64 for the video. But Butts and I are going to try our best not to react. We're not going to do anything extra special. I'm not going to show off or fly under arches or any crazy thing like that. We're going to try to make it to where if you want to watch the video, you'll have some nice screen-savory content to enjoy. And if you're listening to the audio, you won't be missing a thing. So that being said, I'm going to dive right in and sling it over to Butts, who's going to give us the premise of today's episode and the topic of today's discussion.
Yeah, Josh, so we are talking about today something that has been bouncing around in my head for a little bit after I read a quote by Roger Ebert, and that is video games art? That's a better way to phrase that. Can a video game be considered a work of art? If you don't know or don't remember, throwing it back to the 90s, Roger Ebert is a Pulitzer Prize winning movie critic. If you remember the show Siskel and Ebert, he's the Ebert in that. And he has been reviewing movies for decades. He's written hundreds, maybe thousands of articles. So he does know a thing or two about art and about culture. And he has basically said video games can never be art. Just full stop right there. The quote that inspired this episode was, Roger Ebert was having a discussion about should you have played the video game Doom before you watch the movie Doom, which he didn't like the movie Doom. And this came up. He said, I am prepared to believe that video games can be elegant, subtle, sophisticated, challenging, and visually wonderful. But I believe the nature of the medium prevents it from moving beyond craftsmanship into the stature of art. To my knowledge, no one in or out of the field has ever been able to cite a game worthy of comparison with the great dramatists, poets, filmmakers, novelists, and composers. That a game can aspire to be artistic importance as a visual experience, I accept. But for most gamers, video games represent a loss of those precious hours we have available to make ourselves more cultured, civilized, and empathetic. Kind of getting into the old man, get off my lawn, this isn't art kind of thing. So I just want to launch into that. Josh, and I want the audience to think too, do you think video games are art?
The short of it is, yes, I do think video games can be art. Yes.
All right, well, that'll wrap it up, and we're going to...
Thank you for your time. I hope you've enjoyed the episode.
No, I agree. I think video games can be art, and I would push to say that probably some games have become art.
I agree. I definitely think that some video games are art. I don't think all of them are, and I'll get into that later, but Buds, if I may, I would like to basically take Roger Ebert's original quote and kind of extrapolate it and simmer it down into some simple, true statements, if I may.
Yeah, please do.
So, according to Roger Ebert, what is art not? What isn't art? He says, I believe video games can be elegant, subtle, sophisticated, challenging, and visually wonderful. But then he says video games aren't art. Therefore, I have to assume he says that things that are elegant, subtle, sophisticated, challenging, and visually wonderful do not comprise art. Which is interesting right off the bat. So in that case, what does Roger Ebert think is art? And to that, I pull the quote when he says, video games represent a loss of those precious hours we have available to make ourselves more cultured, civilized, and empathetic. Therefore, art must be things that make us more cultured, civilized, and empathetic. This is all according to Roger Ebert. This is all, I'm trying to fit the mold of Roger Ebert and get in his head.
Yeah.
So what does Roger Ebert think video games are in that case? If, we've gone over what art is, so now what are video games to Roger Ebert? He says they're artistic importance as a visual experience. Whatever that means. I don't know how you can say they're artistic importance as a visual experience and not say they're art.
Not say it's right there, the word art, yeah.
He says it. He says it right there. But so in that case, what does Roger Ebert think video games aren't? Art. AKA, using the reflexive property of mathematics, video games are not things that make us more cultured, civilized, and empathetic. So, going off of that, I think that's at least helped me to kind of fit my brain into the mold that Roger Ebert is trying to put video games into. If that helps simplify anything.
A little bit. That's interesting, because I kind of you went, all right, Roger Ebert, I'm going to play by your rules and refute him that way. Whereas I went like, nah, man, you don't get to make the rules. Because I went straight to like, fine, what is art? Do video games meet the criteria that other things that we consider art meet as well? And that's the route I went.
Yes. Okay. Well, yes, let's go into that a little bit. Yes, dive into that for a moment.
So I'm looking up, the definition I went with is art. This is from Wikipedia, because I love Wikipedia. Art is a diverse range of human activities involving the creator of visual, auditory, or performing artifacts which express the creator's imagination, conceptual ideas, or technical skill, intended to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, there's nothing in that excludes video games right from the start. I mean, like, all of that can be applied to a game.
Yes, I agree. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong. I would love to just be like, Roger Ebert, that's a dumb statement, and you're dumb, and you're dumb, and video games are amazing, and they're art. So, like, don't get me wrong. I could just end the conversation right here and just be like, wrong. Next question. Next topic. But I kind of wanted to be like, all right, Roger, let's play by your rules and see what we come up with. So that being said, let's see. What have I got here? One thing I will give Roger Ebert. Well, not necessarily give him, but he says, no one in or out of the field has ever been able to cite a game worthy of comparison with the great dramatists, poets, filmmakers, novelists, and composers. Well, a big problem right off the bat with that is one person does not a video game make. With exceptions, I'll give. But typically, I mean, you've got your Shigeru Miyamoto's, you've got your Hideo Kojima's, you've got your Toby Fox, who made the game Undertale entirely by himself. But for the most part, you're not going to be able to look at video games and be like, oh, there's the greats. Oh, the great. You can't just be like Beethoven, You can't be like, oh, Socrates, Plato, all that stuff. Yeah,
there's not one person behind the helm. Exactly.
I mean, more often than not, video games are a multi-person venture. So first off, Roger Ebert, strike one. But no, so I mean, yeah, I guess I say that to say you're not going to have that like artist art ratio in the video gaming world. So it's one thing I think that's going to come up a lot in this conversation is that a lot of what people traditionally consider art and video games are kind of comparing apples to oranges.
Little.
Because, well, to put it this way, if you compare the graphics, like, what am I trying to say? Like, you can compare the graphics of a video game to a painting, and you can compare the compositions of video games to artistic songs, like music in general. You can compare role-playing game stories to stories found in novels and novelettes and that kind of thing, poetry. But video games, for the most part, will always be a combination of those things. And in that way, I think should be judged a little bit differently, because video games are always going to be the sum of its parts. Unless you're just specifically awarding someone, like giving Grant Kirkhope an award for Banjo-Kazooie for music. Like, sure, that's a thing. But
you should.
Yes, my gosh, that man's a genius. But Roger Ebert, again, I'm trying to fit the mold of Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert is saying video games can never be art. And he's taking that as one thing. He's taking a video game as one single solitary thing and judging that on whether or not it can be art. So that's what I'm going to try to do. And that even being said, a lot of the games, and Butts, this might be a hot take. This might be something you might be like, ooh.
Okay.
I think a lot of the games that gamers point to and say, that video game is art. To me, a lot of them, like Journey on the PlayStation 3 and Flower, which was that also on the PlayStation 3? I think it was. But a lot of games that try to be art, to me, actually fall short of what they can be, because often when a developer or programmer tries to make an artsy video game, what they end up doing is just trying to copy another art form. So games like Journey and Flower, they try to make a really beautiful game, but that's just a painting. Because oftentimes those games lack gameplay. It's very beautiful. Or even games that try to have like a twisty story. Like, they might not have the graphics. They're still just... they're trying to be art, but in doing so, fall into the trap of trying to just be another form of art.
I agree with that. Like, I think there are few and far between games that you can consider art. And like, I wouldn't point to Journey as a work of art. Like, is it visually stunning? Absolutely. Should you play it? 1000% yes. But I wouldn't say that I think that is art. And I also wouldn't tell somebody who got a deep emotional reaction from that game or any other game that, like, no, it's not art, you didn't feel that. I wouldn't say that. But I think art does like a very specific thing, and that a game might not always do that specific thing every moment of the game. And part of that, I'll get into later, is just the nature of video games and the medium. But I think that you can, if certain things are considered art, without question, all of the characteristics of those things that are art can be applied to video games. And then, like, what are we doing here? Like, if you're going to discount video games, you have to discount those other things that are art as well. But if you're going to say, no, you keep the poetry, you keep the operas, you keep the music, you keep the films, but the video game has everything in common with those things, then it's art too. What are we doing here?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, if you've got a great story, like if you've got Metal Gear Solid 4, which has way too many cutscenes and is basically just trying to be a movie, if you like it, if you like the cutscenes and it tells a good story and you like it, then how is it different from a TV show or a movie?
Yeah, and to clap back, TV shows, movies, comic books, there are a lot of things that we consider art now that when they were first came out, or they're first developing or trying to find the language of the medium, critics said, no, that can't be art. Like when the film came out, people were like, oh, that's... You just watch it, you're not actually engaging your imagination like you would in books. Well, this isn't art, this can never be art. And then, nope, film eventually found its language and it became art. Same with TV. It's like, oh, this is just 30-minute, half-hour little short stories. Well, this is just a distraction. This isn't film, it can't be art. But no, eventually TV figured it out and it's now art. You could say that there are some shows that are artistic and are art. And I think video games have only been around since, the 80s? Maybe the 70s, if you get picky. So, you could still argue that, games are still trying to figure out, all right, how do we make art with video games? And a few games have done it, and I think in the future more will, but just to flat out say, nope, it can't be, is ignoring all the other art before it that had the same thing said about it.
To be fair... the statement, video games can never be art, is such a huge, sweeping statement.
Yeah, agreed, yeah. Man, you're calling your shot.
He took a hard swing at that.
Yeah, Roger Ebert came to bat.
And before we go too much further, I should point out that Roger Ebert has been dead since 2013, I believe. So it's very probable that he died never finding a video game that he considered art. But such a sweeping statement to say that into the dusk of humanity there will never be an artistic video game is such a broad stroke.
Yeah, really. Whew. I do want to give him a little bit of leeway because he said that statement in 2005, and I tried to rack my brain. I tried to think, what video games in 2005 would I hold up and say, this is art, people should experience this? And I really only came up with Myst, Chrono Trigger, and Final Fantasy VII. I might be wrong. Other people could throw video games at me. I'm not saying these are the best games, and I'm not saying you can't love other games, but I'm saying I would hold these three games up against art forms that Roger Ebert would hold up and say, this is art. After 2005, you've got a slew of other games that I think you could make a case for. No, these belong in the pantheon of art too. Stuff like Silent Hill 2, Shadow of the Colossus, BioShock, Fallout 3, Limbo, Dark Souls, The Unfinished Swan, The Stanley Parable, Last of Us, and controversial Doki Doki Literature Club.
Yes. That's actually on my list.
Oh, good. Okay. Oh, good. I would throw that out there and say this is art. This is a kind of art. So there's more video games after the quote than before that.
Yeah, and I totally. I made a short list of games that I think would be art to fitting to Roger Ebert's definition, which again is things that make us more cultured, civilized, and empathetic. I included Doki Doki Literature Club. I think that game is pure art. for reasons I won't discuss on this episode.
And it's madness. It's pure madness, but also art.
Well, and the reason I picked Doki Doki Literature so specifically over so many other video games is that you could not do Doki Doki Literature Club as a movie, as a book.
Yes.
As, it would not work as any medium other than video games. That is...
Yep.
That is purely taking a video game and squeezing it out as an artistic video game. It's purely an artistic video game.
I agree. I 100% agree that you cannot do Doki Doki in anything but a video game.
Yeah. And even he said, I did this just to kind of like pick at Roger Ebert a little bit, but he says if there are things that make us more cultured, civilized, and empathetic, you know what video game series fits right into that? Assassin's Creed. Because it takes place throughout history and in other cultures that it educates us about. I think
that's true.
It fits into Roger Ebert's basic definition here.
Yeah, I want Is Activision? Do they make Assassin's Creed?
Ubisoft.
Ubisoft. I want Ubisoft to go to more locations. Like they're kind of sticking to one. They're kind of sticking just to like the U.S. and Assassin's Creed 4, and then a bunch in Europe. So like they have the chance to expand and get even more artistic. But I agree. Yeah, it does. It literally puts you in like ancient Greece or Renaissance Italy or stuff like that. It's like you get empathy and do experiences from this game that you wouldn't get in a film or a book or something like that.
Exactly. And I kind of say Assassin's Creed is kind of picking on him because a lot of people wouldn't think of Assassin's Creed as the artsiest of video games.
Yeah. But that's his definition.
That's what he said, and it fits. Oh, what else did I say?
Yep. And if he's going to say that, I think one of his things, because I read some other things he said, is that a game is something you do, like it's an activity, but art is something that you experience. So like you're watching a film, but you're not really interacting with the film, you're just taking it in, or music, you're just taking in the music. Whereas games, you have to actually participate in, and he would say that a game has rules and goals that the player is supposed to meet, and that is one of the things that disqualifies it. It's like, well, you're supposed to play along with the game, and I would say no, that's part of the art is you playing the game. It's like if you want to learn who you are as a person. Then the game is going to make you, especially open world games, are going to make you make choices. And it's like, oh, you got to reflect. Why did I send that person to jail? Or why did I save that person even though they're bad? Like, that's the definition of, self-reflection. And also, like, no, man, all art is interactive. You need an audience to have art.
That's
even
true.
the film, if you just show a film in an empty theater, that's not art. It's just being played to nobody. It's just like, you're just wasting resources, I guess. But as soon as you have someone observe it, now it's art, because that art can bounce off of that person and interact with them. So that, I think that cuts out some of his argument about like, well, you need to experience art. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, you experience games too.
And I could see some like hipster theater being like, it's a movie being played to an empty theater. It's art. Like I can totally French see guy, that. Yeah. It is art. But
yeah.
I would dare say that video games interactability is what really has the potential to separate it, to kind of put it I guess not necessarily. I was going to say above and beyond, but I'll just say separate. That is what makes it a separate medium from movies, books, art, paintings, etc.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes it stand out. Paintings are, fit into this box of art. Paintings have to be like some substance on a two-dimensional canvas, or sculptures can be three, whatever confining rules there are to separate, paintings from books, from movies, which are, pretty obvious. I think the defining characteristic that separates video games is its interactability. And I think that's why games like Doki Doki Literature Club really stand out. Gonna say really quick, Doki Doki Literature is for mature audiences. I really want as many of you to experience the game as you can. It's free to play on Steam. However, listen to what it tells you. When you first start up the game, it's going to give you a message. Listen to that message and weigh whether or not the game is right for you. Moving on. So yes, the interactability. One thing you said that Roger Ebert mentioned that does hold a little true, I think, is that games are typically, for the most part, video games are an escape. It's a way to get away from personal challenges and heightening your culture and your civilization. So a lot of games, I give that to Roger Ebert. I definitely don't think every game is art, because a lot of games are just games for fun. But you briefly said that that's what people said about TVs and movies when they first came out. It's like, oh, it's just a distraction. And a lot of games are. And I think games, more than most mediums, are meant to be an escape, first and foremost. Because going to games with choices, like you said, like whether or not you put a person in jail or that sort of thing. A lot of people in video games, you can be a jerk, but not because that's who you are. And a lot of times it's because it's not who you are. So it's a way to express yourself in ways you can't really express yourself otherwise.
Yeah.
Oh, I just hit on a personal little realization though, is that
real time, here we go.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, sort of to come into the meta, video games themselves are a canvas, and then the player's choices and how they play and what they do can in itself be artistic expression. So
yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to say, I think we would all say that certain buildings and architecture can be viewed as art. Like look at the statement this building is making, or look how this building is challenging you and the preconceptions that you might not have even known you had. And it's from architecture, from the building design. And all architecture does is create a space for you to interact with. And I think that's what video games do as well. They create a virtual space for you to interact with. And sometimes people are going to, if you showed them who's that famous architecture? Frank Lloyd Wright. If you showed them a Frank Lloyd Wright house, some people are just going to run around and be like, oh, look at this. This is a nice house. Look at this crazy. And other people are going to seriously sit down and think, wow, I thought a house was A, B, and C, and this is clearly a house, but it's challenging my A, B, and C. So other games are going to do that too. They're going to make, some people are just going to run around in Grand Theft Auto and shoot everything with a rocket launcher, and that's fine. You could do that. Lord knows I have. But other people might sit down with Grand Theft Auto and be like, wait, I'm free to do anything in this world. Why am I still stopping at traffic lights? Why am I still doing certain things? And that would challenge them. And like, if you consider a building art, you've got to consider what that does to a person in Grand Theft Auto art as well. Mm-hmm. Although I wouldn't actually say Grand Theft Auto is art, but
right. So yeah, Roger Ebert, not only are video games art, they're art. They're art twice. Art within art.
Double art. There are art. To be fair to Roger Ebert, he also said that very few films are art. So he's a very picky person. He's not doing a double standard. He's like, art is very rare. It rarely happens in books. It rarely happens in films. And he just because, which is like, I don't think it'll happen ever in video games.
Ever. You said ever.
Yeah. Threw that ever in there.
Yeah, and let's see. I was gonna say, yeah. Hey, what way can we destroy Roger Ebert's credibility as soon as we can, so we don't have to finish this conversation? No, I'll keep taking him. I'll keep playing by his rules. Let's see. I did actually find he made a follow-up article called "Okay Kids Play on My Lawn," where
Nice.
Where he said basically a lot of gamers jumped on him for making this statement, and he defended himself. And he said he said a lot of gamers pointed him at several video games. He said a few, like 2 or 3, kind of rose to the top. He said one of those was Myst, which Butts mentioned.
Yep.
Which I kind of agree. I think that one can definitely be art. He said Flower, which I said I don't think really is art. I think it's just copying another art medium. And he said Shadow of the Colossus. A lot of people said Shadow of the Colossus was another game that people tried to convince him was art. And that one's kind of in the middle to me. Like, that one, it's definitely visually stunning, and even the story has some interesting ambiguities and twists, but I think it is another one of those games that ultimately tried way too hard to be art, and instead just kind of became another art form that wasn't video games. Because it's a good game, and it's visually stunning, but I don't know, I'll think more on that, but...
Yeah, and everyone has their own, like, this should be art, because I would throw Fallout 3 into that discussion if I didn't have any restrictions, because there are things that go on in Fallout 3, decisions I had to make, or little, side stories that I found that I was just like, oh, I'm going to go do a side quest because I've got to let my brain process what just happened, and, like, really affected me, and go, holy cow, like... And
yeah,
some people probably just was like, Fallout 3, whatever, I just shot everything. So, I mean, games, not even the whole game has to be art. Even just like bits and pieces of it can be art.
Well, and so, you said in Fallout 3, some people just shoot stuff, whereas you had some mind-blowing story situations, and, Ebert actually kind of addresses that in his follow-up blog that he did. Let's see if I can find the quote in here. Let's see. Well, I don't see it immediately, but the short of it is, he said that if I can paraphrase, he said that a lot of what defeats video games being art for him is that so much left to choice. So I kind of get what he's saying there. I don't agree with it, but I kind of get what he's saying, is that like it cheapens some choices. It makes them meaningless if you can just reload the game or play through it a second time and do it in a completely different way. It definitely lessens the value. Like, if I'm playing a heavily story-driven game and I let somebody die, it will never mean as much as it would in a movie, because in a movie, that's it. That person's dead. There's no other outcome. But in a game, I could reload my game or start a new one and have that person live. So that's an interesting thought to me, is that that choice, as amazing as it is in a video game, and while it does provide some of that interactivity we were talking about earlier, can lessen the artistic value of a video game.
Oh, see, I'm going to push back on, not on your point, but like on Roger Ebert's point of that, in that he's saying choice cheapens video games, and I'm like, well, but you don't have any choice when you're watching a movie. If you're saying, like, well, it cheapens it because I can choose to do something else in a video game, so it doesn't have that much impact. And I'm like, well, but you have no choice in a movie. You're just digesting it. Whereas I would argue, no, I think that the fact that you can make a choice in a video game, if you sit there and think about it, should say something about yourself to you. Like, did you give at the end of Fallout 3, did you give the wasteland water, or did you hoard it for yourself, or did you give it to the Brotherhood? Did you side with the Enclave? Like, some people are just like, oh, that was a fun story. Okay, I did that. Or they would replay the game 4 times just to check off the boxes of, oh, that's what that ending looks like. But you could just as easily sit there and go, why did I make that choice? Why did I think the Enclave would be the best person to give this water to, given everything that they've shown me in the game? What does that say about me? Whereas if I'm just watching a movie and I watch something happen, I would, at most I could go, well, I wouldn't have done that, but I'm just, this isn't my movie. And like, that's it. That's what you're moving on from.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So to you, you're saying Fallout 3 made you more cultured, civilized, and empathetic.
Definitely made me more empathetic, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which, according to Roger Ebert, art. Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't want to beat up on Roger Ebert, so let's change gears to somebody who is alive, who could defend himself. Hideo Kojima has said games are not art.
Huh. He's one of the last people.
Absolutely, he's one of the last people, I would think. Because his games are so, he frames the games like a movie, like you said, it's just a really long movie. So you'd think he would be on board with this, but no. Kojima has said that he thinks the goal of video games, when you get down to brass tacks, is to give player satisfaction. And therefore, games are more of a service than art.
Right, which goes back into that escapism I was talking about.
Yeah.
And wow, he is the last person I thought would have said that. He's always inspired by movies and shows and stuff.
Yeah, really.
Did you mention Hideo Kojima, by the way, was the producer on most of the Metal Gear Solid games from Konami, which are typically pretty epic games. So that's who that is, just to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yep.
I feel like a lot of what we've kind of been hitting on lately in the past couple thought processes is that it's all very subjective based on who's playing the game and how they're affected by it, which is to say, video games can just be very subjective. But hey, you know what else is very subjective? Every other form of art.
Yeah. Just like I could walk up to a painting and be like, I don't see anything about this. And somebody else could walk up and be like, oh my God, it's right there. Look at this. The artist is asking you about this and is challenging this. And is, Yeah, so it's like, if it's a subjective thing, if you have put creativity into something and you give it out to people or release it to people and want them to feel something, or it makes them feel something else, that's art. Like, we're done here. That's the end of the discussion for me.
Mm-hmm. And Butts, I'm glad you kind of turned the conversation away from picking on Roger Ebert. That was very generous of you. All right, I'm going to turn the conversation back to picking on Roger Ebert for a second, if I may.
And undoing it. All right.
I think the real kicker here is that in the follow-up, Okay Kids, Play on My Lawn, Roger Ebert was also confronted by people saying, well, have you played video games? What have you played? What have you experienced in the video game world? And the bottom line is, he said, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but he pretty much said, none. I haven't played a video game, and I don't really want to. And
yeah, then
that's the note he ended it on.
Yeah, then like, to be dramatic, into the fire with his review. Like, if you haven't played a video game, don't come at me.
Yeah. Which kind of makes me wonder if he kind of leaned into the how should I put this? The unfortunate opinion that video games are just bad in general. There's the moral panic that people think they incite violence, and people think, oh, he's playing video games when he could be doing something productive with his life. Like that whole, people our age have heard it 100 times through our childhood at this point. So I do also wonder if Roger Ebert was just kind of leaning into that crowd, just kind of going with that
generational thing,
with that mob. It could just be kind of the generational thing.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. So here's another difference between video games and every other medium out there, in that, so if you're trying to tell a story, if you have a book or a movie and a character says, all right, I need to get to Jim's house to give him this, dollar, you would just cut to them being at Jim's house. The scene would change in the movie and they're knocking on Jim's door. That's it. Or the book the chapter would end, the next chapter would begin, you're walking into Jim's house. Mm-hmm. But in a video game, you have to show that person going from where they are now to Jim's house, and then they can start the next beat of the story. So video games have to fill in those in-between spaces that other mediums don't have to fill, which is, I think, why Roger Ebert is like, yeah, I can't get into a game, because he doesn't find those in-between moments interesting, whereas, like, yeah, maybe we do, and, like, yeah, we could go on a side quest, or, like, we could fast travel places, but video games have you do things, force you to do things that other mediums don't force you to do. Mm-hmm. And if you aren't okay with that, nothing the game can do is ever going to make you go like, oh, okay, I'm fine with this. Well,
and that is one of the really tricky parts if you are trying to make a video game that is art, is that that space you mentioned, like getting to Jim's house, that's typically where the game is.
Yes, so... yeah, exactly.
So that is kind of the tricky part is, and again, for a video game to become art, I think it needs to be kind of the sum of its parts, is that the gameplay needs to kind of seamlessly work with the story. I always think it is kind of chunky when you have like a highly storied game, but then you have to kind of chunk it up with some monster fights and leveling up and that kind of thing.
Yeah, grinding it out. That's why I would put like Dark Souls or some From Software games on there, because I think they are the best out there at merging gameplay mechanics with story elements. And you really feel like, why can I die and just resurrect and try this game over again? If it were a movie, either that would be a plot point in the movie of like, oh my god, I could rewind time, like Groundhog Day, or that would just be weird, just for a character to die and then the scene changes and then we're back earlier in the film and then they don't die, something like that. But in a game, you could die and you can come back and you can try again, knowing what you know now. And From Software does a great job of being like, okay, how do we fold that element of gaming into the story and the world we're creating, so that you don't think about it. You don't think about, oh, this is just a video game thing of me dying and retrying. You think, oh, I'm an undead person. I'm always going to come back to life and try again.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because the world of Dark Souls is based around the fact that the world is filled with beasts and monsters, and fighting them is, well, especially like in Bloodborne, which is also kind of a Dark Souls game, the whole game is built around like the hunt. Like it's nighttime, which is when the hunters come out and hunt the beasts. So it's like, you can do all the fighting in the world, and it's story appropriate, fits right in. So, yeah, I think those are the best. The games that I would most likely call art are the ones that seamlessly merge gameplay and story into one cohesive thing. Because, like, then when you do it right, the gameplay conveys story, and the story conveys gameplay.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't notice the rules and the stuff going on behind the scenes. And films do that too. Like a good film, you watch it and you're like, oh my god, that was amazing, and you think about it, and then someone points out, hey, what about this flaw or this, production mess up? And then you're like, oh yeah, I didn't even notice that, because it was doing such a good job of telling a story or whatever it was doing.
Yes, I agree. Totally.
So I've got one more. I had a couple things I wanted to shoot out. The last one is this, that somebody has said that play is a physical need, or it satisfies a physical need that people have, like animals and people and stuff. You know, they're young, they like to play. That kind of trains you to grow up and things like that. So people and children like to play, and that satisfies a physical need for them. But art doesn't satisfy any kind of physical need. Like the Mona Lisa isn't satisfying a need that people have that will keep them alive. So in that way, they said video games can't be art because video games are all about play, and play is not raised to the level of art because play satisfies something that it scratches an itch that we have, but art doesn't scratch an itch that we have. So therefore video games cannot be art. What would you say to that?
I don't think that fulfills Roger Ebert's definition of art right out the gate, because he says, because to him, art is personally challenging and enhances you as a person.
Yep.
As for me personally, no, I don't agree with, let me put it this way. Like, no, but yes, yes, but no. No, what I'm trying to say is, I don't think video games count as play in that sense, because if I'm correct in what you're saying, is that that's saying play is important because it teaches you like social aspects and physical aspects, like things like without going too far into it, I've personally worked with actual monkeys, actual rhesus macaques. That's not a joke or a hyperbole. I've actually worked with them, and yeah, I mean, I'll see them like from practically infancy, like they're wrestling with each other and doing the little play bites and that kind of thing. And what that does is that's teaching them like how to fight when they get older and how to interact with others. And while I agree video games can improve your social talents, and in some ways they don't at all, but it just depends on how you play it.
Yeah.
But I don't think in the sense you mean it, that video games are even considered play. So in that sense,
okay.
Yeah, I think video games still can be art.
You would deny it right from the start. Like, no, it's not play. It's not just playing.
Right, yeah. It's not enhancing your cognitive functions or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that kind of gives me pause, because I'm like, okay, yeah. I can see the logic in, if it satisfies this physical thing, it's not art, because art is above that. But I would say that, well, there's a lot of things that we do that would, like, there's a lot of stuff that we do that doesn't satisfy a physical need that would fit in that category. Like, I'm going to go back to architecture. Like, we take time to design our buildings to make them look nice and to challenge us and to, like, you know, serve a purpose. But we need buildings to live in. Like, we need shelter. That is a physical need. So going by that definition, then you would have to say, well, architecture is not an art because it fulfills a physical need that we all have, which is shelter. And cooking can't be an art because it fulfills the physical need of us to eat.
Very good
point. So again, if you're going to knock video games for that, there's a couple other things you need to knock and take out. But no one's going to argue that food can't be art or that a beautifully designed building can't be art. So then you can't use that argument for video games.
Yeah, I agree. That's an incredibly good point. What else do I have in my notes? Well, I was just going to say, I still haven't really touched on it, but my personal definition of art really lies more with the artist. And that is to say, I think my personal definition of art is anything that anyone has created where they are trying to creatively express something, a thought or a feeling.
Yeah.
Or something like that. And that does knock out some video games. A lot of video games were just made by suits who want to get the next version of the game out.
Do I think Borderlands is art? No, I do not. But
but I'd say any game where the head developer was like, okay, I want gamers to feel this. Like, even going back to Shigeru Miyamoto and like Zelda, he was like, I want to create a world that people can explore and like see a cave and be like, oh, what's in that cave? Like, that's creative expression. He wants gamers to feel a certain way and to experience a certain feeling. And so
yeah, really,
in that way, I think the original Legend of Zelda is art. But again, that puts more of the emphasis on the artist and less on the art itself. I think intention, for at least my personal definition of art, has a lot to do with the intention behind the product, the art.
Yeah, and the less hands that are kind of in the pot trying to get things done, the more likely it is to probably be art. Because you said, what, Undertale was made by one guy? Is that right?
Right. Yep.
Yes. So, you know, a lot of the games that we would say this is art were probably made by very small teams, or at least smaller teams than other games. And that's easier to have a focused, all right, here's what this game is about. Here's what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm. And Undertale, again, like Doki Doki Literature Club, that game would not work as any other form of art. That's another one. Like, I highly suggest everyone play Undertale at least once if you're a gamer. It's another game where they use the medium to its fullest, and Toby Fox really uses the interactivity, and he actually even uses choice in probably the best way it's ever been used in a video game. Because Undertale is a game where you can choose to be good or you can choose to be bad. But when you choose to be good or bad, he makes sure you feel it. Like, you can't just kill somebody and be like rewarded for it just right out. Like, I don't want to. I want to talk more about it, but I don't want to give away any spoilers, so I'll simply say, I'll leave it at that. If you're good, you feel good on the inside, and if you're bad, he makes you feel bad on the inside.
Yeah, it's an empathy thing.
Really good. Yeah, he does. Undertale does. It's where's my quote? Undertale makes you more cultured, civilized, and empathetic, which, according to Roger Ebert, makes it art. Boom.
So let's get personal. What games would you put and say, this game made me feel something that I think Roger Ebert would consider art? Like, what games do you say, not that you would hold up and be like, this is art, but you were like, the same reaction that Ebert would have had to a great film, you would say, I think I've had that reaction with this game.
I can definitely say right off the bat, we're currently playing through Illusion of Gaia right now on our channel, and I know I was a kid when I played it, but I think I even mentioned in the very first episode of that playthrough that Illusion of Gaia is one of the first games that actually made me feel feelings as I played it. And I'll certainly say that video games used to affect me more on an emotional level back when I was younger than they do now. But I can say the same exact thing about movies and books and things like that. I mean, the truth is, you get on in life and you've seen most things. So unfortunately, that's a lot of it. But so no, I don't think Roger Ebert would look at Illusion of Gaia and call that art. But I do think a more recent experience that comes to mind is the ending of BioShock Infinite,
Yeah.
Most games don't affect me in any kind of physical way, but I'll never forget. I actually beat. I knew I was at the end of BioShock Infinite, coming up on my bedtime. Like I needed to go to bed so I could get up for work the next morning, and I ended up beating it. I had no idea what was going to happen, and I'm not going to tell you folks at home. It's a huge spoiler, but I beat the game. It made my head swirl. Like I could not stop thinking about it. I got in bed and I kept trying to go to sleep. I just kept trying to go to sleep, and my brain just kept being like, "But what about that BioShock Infinite ending, though?" So it probably
bad timing on that.
It probably took me 2 hours to fall asleep, and even then, when I woke up and went to work the next morning, I was like, "BioShock Infinite ending."
Yeah. Yeah, that was a bad call on your part. You don't play that right before bedtime. You go, oh, well, I got to sit with that for a while.
Well, I know now. I didn't know at the time.
Let me see. I could say that there are 3 games that have given me a very specific emotion of dread, which is like, I'm not afraid. I feel dread. And that is Super Metroid, Dark Souls, and Bloodborne. And Dark Souls and Bloodborne, those are kind of more recent. But all 3 of those games gave me the same feeling, that crushing feeling of, I am alone, nobody cares about me. If I died right here, no one would know, and the world would go on without me. And that was a terrifying feeling to feel. And video games made me feel that.
You actually just reminded me of another very deep. This might actually be my most impactful video game moment I've ever played through, and it was just kind of the timing ended up perfectly for the game it was. But the game was an indie game on the PlayStation 3, I believe, called Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. And the game's title pretty much sets up the premise right there. Again, I won't go too deep, because if I explain it too much, it'll be spoilers. But the very basic version of it is you're kind of the last person alive on Earth. Everybody's gone to the Rapture. And the feeling the game wanted to give you it was kind of existential dread and loneliness were definitely kind of the 2 main themes of the game. And I happened to play it. I got it because it was one of the first free games after PlayStation Plus started their free games every month program. So it was so it came out. I got it for free, and because it was one of the first ones, I didn't put it in my backlog. I played it pretty soon afterwards, and my wife had actually just left town to go be with her mom, I think. So I was actually in the house completely by myself. I woke up early one morning, fired it up, and it was actually so engrossing. I played right through lunch. I think I beat the game at like 2 in the afternoon or something like that, because I couldn't put it down. But I actually finished the game feeling probably the loneliest I've ever felt in my entire life. And a video game did that. It was incredible. Oh, it was amazing.
Yep. So eat it, Roger Ebert.
Yeah. And again, Roger Ebert said no game ever. So
yeah. It's like, come on, man. It's not fair to, in 2005, say no video game can ever be art because it doesn't compare to the great works of literature and art. And it's like, yeah, well, video games, like, you're going to compare, like, yeah, Borderlands to Wuthering Heights or something like that, or like, yeah, of course Shakespeare's going to win out over video games. He's been around for hundreds of years, and we've dissected every word he's ever said. Video games have been around since the 80s, so
right.
Yeah, give us some more time.
That will be very interesting to see in the future. Like, Yeah, I'll just say 200 years. I'll be very interested to know, like in 200 years, if people are still talking about Super Mario Brothers on the NES. That would be very telling, I have to admit. You folks at home, comment under this post in 200 years and let me know
Yeah.
if we're still talking about video games.
Yeah. Upload to our frozen heads what you guys are still talking about.
All right. Well, that's it. That's pretty much everything I had in my notes. Is there anything else, Butts, you want to hit before we've hit the hour mark?
I think that might be it. I mean, I do agree with some people that if you think video games are just games, if that's what your definition is, then yeah, I don't think you ever will think video games can be art in the same way that like a football game can't be art. Like, yeah, it's just a game to you. But if you can get past it and go, all right, let me take this as something that's telling a story or is trying to get a reaction from me, then yeah, video games can totally be art. And legally they already are art. They're protected under the First Amendment, which freedom of speech. So like legally, like Roger Ebert or Kojima couldn't sue and be like, video games are not art. They'd be like, no, get that out of here. They totally are art. So
yeah.
It's like, what are we even doing here?
Okay, so yeah, I guess bottom line from Riff Arcade, video games can be art, although it is highly subjective. So at the end of the day, we say yes, you can say whatever you want, I guess.
You'd be wrong, yeah, but
so, yeah, I guess that's it. That's all we can really do for this episode of Riff Arcade. I think I don't think we can squeeze any more blood out of this stone, so I hope you've enjoyed this special hour-long podcast episode of Riff Arcade. Since this is the first one, it's very important to us that you tell us what you think about this format. Did you enjoy, if you're watching the video, did you enjoy staring at me flying around in 64 polygons for an hour? And if you were just listening to the audio only, did you enjoy the game audio? Was it too repetitive, or was it just fine as background music? Do you think it would be better if we didn't have any background music at all for our audio only version of these podcasts? Just all these things and more. Let us know what you think, but we certainly hope you've enjoyed it. And we will see you on the next episode of Riff Arcade.